All right, so I figured out one thing in life, if nothing else. If you do what you're supposed to do, from there you can pretty much get away with doing whatever it is that you want to do. Now, I recognize that's a dangerous thing to say doing this talk at a high school, so I'm not telling your kids that they basically, as long as they mop the floor, they can tear your house up. It's not that. But if you handle what you're responsible for, privileges tend to come after that. So I was toying around with this talk, and the title I ultimately came up with it was for the freedom of structure, because that's a lesson that I had to learn kind of the hard way across time. Now, in the last 15 years or so, I've done a bunch of different jobs, as many as you can imagine. I've worked as a music critic, I've worked covering sports, I've worked as a college professor, I have worked doing television, I've done podcasts, I've created YouTube videos, I've done all of those things. And one thing that I had in common when I started doing all those things was that I had absolutely no idea what it was that I was doing when I started. That includes school. I think the school is one of those things that you start and you go and you just kind of figure it out. And while I was doing school, or while I was in school, I figured out there was one thing I was good at with school, which was being smart. I could go as far as being smart was going to take me. If I walked in and I could figure some things out, then I could go. And that took me a long way. It took me through elementary school, it took me through middle school, it got me to high school, it took me to college, it took me through one master's degree, and then I worked on a PhD, and being smart all of a sudden wasn't good enough. It was really hard. And once it got to be really hard, I realized something. I didn't have a counterpunch. Like, once it got hard, all I could do was say, that's kind of difficult. And I could try to be as smart as I could, but I didn't have anything that was doing anything for me at those moments. I had nothing. And what I realized was I had no grounding. I didn't have any structure in the way that I went about doing anything, because my whole mentality on it was I could get in there and I could figure it out. And I could figure it out because I was smart. And then I was working on a PhD in economics, which required me to do three things. It required me to tighten up my work habits. It required me to change my thought process, because doing economics is completely different. And then it required me to do a whole lot of calculus. You can't do all three of those things at one time. Like, if you're trying to get a handle on what you got going, two of those at the most are what you could do. And then the microeconomics qualifying exam came around and I didn't have it and I was done, and they told me I had to go on about my business. Now, that was 10 years ago. And the three things that happened there worked out okay, ultimately. My work habits did improve. I learned a lot of economics. My thought process was a whole lot more structured. And by the time I was done, I didn't have to do calculus anymore. And I'll take not doing calculus anymore over having a PhD every day. The problem that came next, though, is what do you do with the rest of your life? And so I went full on into media. I've been a freelance writer for years before, and I decided that that was the thing that I was going to do. And I had no idea what I was doing at that. So I'd sit at home, I'd come up with something, I'd write, I'd send it in, and somebody would tell me how great the thing was that I'd sent in. Well, that creates a bit of a problem, because now I think it doesn't matter that I don't know what I'm doing. If you were here for the first part of the speech, you realize that that caused me problems in the last place. But now I'm in this new one where I just convinced myself, but I didn't want to do economics, but that really wasn't such a big deal. Now I'm doing this, I like it, it doesn't matter that I don't know what I'm doing. And when you're a freelance writer, they never try to tell you really how to get better at it. It's a plain sort of relationship. They're not trying to build you into being a spouse. You're only going to be there once and maybe you come back again. So then about a year later, I got a job. I was a full-time writer, and I had no idea what I was doing. And then I get into this, and now the expectations are different. Not only do they expect me to know what I'm doing, they're expecting me to be able to tell them what it is that I'm doing. Everything is kind of flipped up, and I'm the guy who doesn't have a counterpart. So I'm there and I'm working, I'm trying to get better at being a writer, and I had a wonderful editor at that time whose name was Thomas Newman. And his job was basically to teach me how to become a better writer. So I'd come out of school realizing that I didn't have very much discipline. And then I came into this new thing I was doing, and I still didn't have very much discipline. In large part because I hated the way that the word discipline sounded. Like, even as I say the word discipline right now, I feel like I want to straighten up my back and go apologize or go sit in my room or something like that. Because the way I looked at myself was that discipline was the antithesis of creativity. That being disciplined was something that you told people to do because they couldn't figure out ways to do these things for themselves. And I'd always seen myself as being this creative person, when in reality I wasn't so much creative as much as it was that I was coasting. But I saw myself as creative, and in a way where I wasn't even able to understand the fact that I'd always been doing left brain activities. Like, I'm thinking myself as being a creative while I'm doing debate. I'm thinking of myself as being a creative while I'm a chemistry major, while I'm doing economics. All these places I'd seen myself as being wildly creative, so no one could tell me what to do, because telling me what to do is stifling what I think made me good. It stifled what I thought was going to make me creative. And I realized at some point that I did not have any level of structure, and even worse than not having any level of structure, I didn't have the ability to accept structure because I thought it was taking away from who I was. So you imagine I've got this full-time writing job, and now I'm going back and forth with this editor. And whenever I would write stuff, all I was doing was just sit down and get on the keyboard, and I'd bang it out, and I'd read it. And I thought if it sounded good, I'd send it in, and I'd gotten all this positive reinforcement. And then one day I've got an editor who's asking me, okay, so you want to write something? I say, yeah. So I say, what do you want to write about? And I tell him a thing I wanted to write about. He's like, what do you want to say? And my response to that is, what do I want to say? I'm just going to go write it. Like, I'll write it, and then you'll get back what I say. And he says, okay to me, well, what is your nut graph? I said, my what? He's like, well, I need a paragraph. Just a paragraph to tell me what it is that you're going to talk about. And I'm thinking to myself, if all you need is a paragraph for me to tell you what I'm going to talk about, why am I wasting my time writing the rest of this? I can just give you a paragraph. And so he says, so what are you talking about? And I start realizing, as I'm talking to him, if you don't know what point it is that you're ultimately going to make, chances are that you don't have a point. And now that meant I had to learn to write. I had to learn all the things that everybody else had been doing, that me and my ego, I had convinced myself that I did not need to know how to do those things, that I was better if I did not know what I was doing. I was better off with that, because then I could come up with something fresh. It would be something that nobody had ever done before. Slowly but surely, in the hard way, I figured something out. Most of the times where everybody's been doing something forever, chances are there's a reason why they've been doing those things forever. Like, you're not going to be the guy to wake up and decide everything that everyone's been doing forever is ridiculous and the way that I do it is correct. However, picking up what everybody else was doing, it overloaded my brain. Like, as being a writer and the pressure of trying to keep my job on a one-year contract, and a one-year contract is not the place where you learn how you're doing what you're doing. But as I'm doing those things, I became a much better writer. Like, I learned how to make better points. I learned how to say things more quickly. I learned how to say things with more impact. And I also was scared to death every time I had to write, because I was overpowered by the idea that I had no idea what I was doing. And so I'm trying to figure out how to do what I'm doing while trying to figure out how to do that exceptionally well on a national platform. And it was too much. And even in a lot of ways to this day, it's a lot for me, because when I write, I get so caught up in whether or not I know what I'm doing. Like, I became the person that I feared that I was going to become. That creatively I would not be the guy that I once was. I would lose that because I was so caught up in trying to figure out what I was doing. But simultaneously, I had these two things going where I recognized that through limitations of my own, I wasn't as creative as I had been before. But I also recognized as I was doing it that I was getting better. Not good enough to keep my job, though. I got fired about a year later. And at that point, I think that was probably counting graduate school the third time that I had been fired. And I had this whole thing that had just really overloaded my mind, and I was trying to figure out what to do with, was the fact that I had always thought I was just smart enough to figure out everything it was that I was doing. And then once I wasn't smart enough, I didn't know what to do. And then I'm overloaded by the idea that maybe, just maybe, I'm not as smart as I thought I was. So I'm trying to figure out if I'm as smart as I thought I was while trying to prove how smart I am.